I'm waving at my own image in the TV screen over there. The only place I've ever done this before is in a bank sometimes, when they turn the camera back on you, and you wave and see yourself. It seems as though this is sort of a test of some of the principles in the book, how to overcome technology and project through all the way. It seems like everything I see here in front of me right now is sort of a barrier, in a sense, to getting through to you. And that's good. That's a good test. If you notice, I can see my own face in the back there in the TV screen, and that's. Can you guess the effect on me of seeing that while I'm talking? It's really strange. I guess I haven't been introduced yet. I'm just sort of talking into the situation now to sort of calm myself and get used to it. We have a Zen master here in the Twin Cities. He says, whatever situation you're in, you should find yourself in it immediately. And I guess that's what I'm trying to do. And it's something I'm going to have to be doing more of, I think, in the future. In the past, I've lived a very private life and a rather shy life, and now all of a sudden, because of this book, I'm being thrust in a very public life, and one in which I'm being watched. I think it's important to remain unself-conscious, if possible, but as I say, everything conspires against it. Everything is pointing at me, looking at me. I walk into a bookstore in New York, and they say, he's here, and I look around for a second to see who this is. So these are barriers that are not barriers, but obstacles that I'm working very hard to try to overcome right now, and this is good practice. I hear I've been recommended for the Today Show, and that's going to be a real scary one when that comes. But I guess one of the messages of the book is not to run away from technology, but to face up to it and to make an art out of it, to use it for good purposes. And I think the technology we're seeing right here and now and using right here and now certainly is an example of an area of technology where this can be done. I'm very happy to see that the Minneapolis College of Art is not, backing away from the advanced electronic media, but is moving right in there and doing exactly what I advocate. So that's very good. I've almost introduced myself, but you. Shall I just go ahead? Okay, fine. I'm already here. All right. I'd like, just for my own information, to find out, first of all, what percentage here has read the book? Will all those who have read the book raise their hands? That's about, I'd say, 30 or 40%. That's pretty good, yeah. It's very expensive. Well, it's not so expensive, actually, as hardcover books are going now, but it is an expense to buy a book like that. But what I hoped to, when I was talking to Kinji, I was aware that that some of you would not have read the book, so I've tried to design what I have had to say in such a way that you'll still be able to get some meaning out of what I'm talking about, even if you don't know about it or haven't read it. I think the thing that we have in common, which is what I want to talk about, is the creative process. We all work in different media. My medium is books, or to put it precisely, book. Other people will be in other areas, but I think the creative process that I go through is not so different from the one that you go through. And if I talk about that creative process in my book, then I think that perhaps some things that I say may have value to you. A lot won't. No two people are in the same situation, have the same problems. But in a sense, everybody, there's a contradiction of that, but in a sense, everybody is in the same situation and has identical problems. So I'd say, while I'm talking, just pick and choose out of whatever I say, that which seems to be useful to you, and if some of it seems wrong, it's probably just because I'm in a different life situation. In talking about the creative process, actually I want to talk about two books. I thought I'd do a kind of a contrast thing. The first is the book I never wrote, and the second is the book I wrote. and contrast how both of those books, the non-book and the book, were arrived at, and by comparing those two, try to get some idea of what was going on, and maybe draw some, or for me, draw some morals, and maybe find something useful in that process. The first book has no title. It never did get a title, and of course it never got written. But it was going to be a great book. My wife and I were just married. We lived in Reno, Nevada. We were dealers in a gambling casino at that time. I dealt the Keno. This is at the Nevada Club. And she dealt the roulette, and we were going to save money. We lived in a cheap trailer, and we saved all the cash we could. We figured the only way to beat these casinos is to work for them and take as much out of it as you can and get out of there and never spend a cent if you could possibly avoid it, then go someplace where costs were very cheap, in this case Mexico, and then sit down there and write the perfect book. So we did that. We worked for 8 months. This is in 1953 or 54. And at the end of 8 months, we had $3,400 saved, I think, which in the 50s was a huge sum of money. And we hitchhiked, Bobby McKee fashion, all the way down through Nevada into Southern California, across Arizona, down into Mexico. Then at the Mexican border, got a third-class bus and went down through Mexico City, through Veracruz, way down into the jungles of Mexico, into a tiny little village town called Acayucan. And in Acayucan, we got paper, and I bought a Parker 51 pen, and we sat down, and I prepared to write, the great book. And at first, I found a good room with proper temperature and proper exposure, and it was nice temperatures down there because it was fall getting into winter. And got a comfortable chair and sat down, and after about 15 minutes, after all this preparation, I said, well, maybe I should walk a little, So, sounds like somebody's familiar with this process. I walked a little for a while around town and met various people and talked for a while. I said, that's very interesting, and now I'll go back and write. And then I went back and I spent maybe an hour or 2 hours, and really was beginning to get sort of frustrated and not willing to admit that maybe what I had come all the way down here for wasn't going to happen. And so I procrastinated on this thing and one thing, the other thing, and this continued for maybe about a week. And at the end of a week, I still hadn't written anything, and I began to become gradually aware that something was very deeply wrong, that everything I had set up, everything I had done to come down here wasn't right. It was a wrong situation. I was doing it badly. And then at that time, an idea came along, well, I'll build a boat. And, and this struck me as one of the most brilliant ideas I'd ever had, of course, about that time, because that got me out of writing. And so I just tore into this boat with great tenacity. I found you could find a carpenter, a trained carpenter, for $12 a week, and you could get pure mahogany at 12 cents a board foot. And we were very close to a river town, and I spent the next 6 months working on a boat. That never got built either, although I still have some of the lumber in my garage, and someday maybe I'll get back to it. So that was the first book, and that is a kind of process which I think it's important to go through at one time or another, the great effort which nothing comes from, the great stymie. And now, in contrast to that, I'd like to talk about the second book, called Zen, the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, which arrived in entirely different circumstances. I was working full-time well, I could back up a little for those who haven't read the book, that I'd been a teacher of writing, although I'd never written anything, and had gotten involved with some very difficult, complex ideas about quality, and as a result, wound up in a mental hospital. and after I'd come out of the mental hospital, was ineligible for teaching work. In fact, ineligible for any kind of work. And hit the streets down here in Minneapolis and started to apply for jobs one after another. I think the people you talk to in those circumstances are very friendly, they're very encouraging, but they know they can't do much for you because in business they try to hire the very best people they can, and once you got a record of mental illness on you, you're not the best person they can hire, and they can get very scared of people, you know, with that kind of background. So I was going through periods of Great Depression, and finally one firm by accident forgot to ask me about my medical record, and I got a job there. And of course, once I'm there, then that's my previous job, and employers afterward don't care so much once you've got a good job on your record. That firm was Northern Pump, I should say, which became Northern Ordnance, became FMC Corporation. And as I've written to some of the tech writers who have asked me for autographed copies, that a lot of the stuff in that book was learned out at Northern Pump. It's a great old firm. The tool and die makers out there, the machinists are real artists, and if you don't know it, just get a job sometime and watch them. They're very limited in their parameters. They don't get much choice. They have to follow blueprints, but they can sure follow them well or they can follow them poorly, and they can do a piece of machinery which is very close, and they can do a piece of machinery which is right on. And these options for quality, which we feel sometimes are exclusive to the arts, I feel also exist in technology. And that lesson was learned out there in Northern Pump. Sometimes called the world's largest machine shop and the world's greatest machine shop, and it really is. These entire launching systems are made by hand out there, by just people taking, in the end, just taking a cloth with a piece of pumice on it and taking down the last millionth of an inch, very carefully, you know, and then doing that sort of work. Well, I got a job and got into that work and became a technical writer and worked very hard at this and tried to employ some of the ideas I'd had before the breakdown into the work I'd been doing. It was a kind of an absorption into middle-class American life. At one time I'd sort of been fighting this, and now I was trying to enter it as hard as I could to be a useful person. I think that's important. And I felt I did pretty well. I worked for Fabritech for a while, and then went to work for a firm called Century Publications, where I became a job technical, or a contract technical writer. This is a person who fills in when there are overloads. They used to call us the rent-a-bodies sometimes, or the Kelly boys, we were people who, when a firm had a sudden contract and not enough technical writers to fill it, would move in and get a job done very quickly and then move out again. We got better pay, but we were very free, and it was a kind of nice life. It's kind of a journeyman tech writer life. This I was doing in about 66, 67, 68, and then in the spring of 68, sitting at an office over in Control Data, writing about the Poseidon missile computers, busy, overloaded, but kind of happy about a motorcycle I had that I just fixed. I started to daydream in the office and said, gee, I wish I could do a little essay on how I fixed the motorcycle and how that's not so very different from the abstract ideas of art or the religious ideas of Zen. A friend of mine, John Sutherland, owned a motorcycle. We used to go riding around in the country from time to time, and he had been talking about a book called Zen and the Art of Archery, and I noticed that his Harley was really retarded. It was that's a good word, yeah. It was really firing improperly, and I thought at the time, well, what he really needs is not a book on Zen, the Art of Archery. He really needs a book on Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, and that was where it all started at that point. But the thing I want to emphasize is that when that idea came, there was no preparation for it. It arrived out of my own circumstances rather than out of a deliberate desire on my part to sit down and write. I wasn't being separate from what I was doing. This was arising out of what I was doing. And relevant to that, I'd just back up a little bit and talk about a teacher I had in University of Minnesota, Alan Tate. He taught poetry there and is quite a famous figure. And I brought in I had been in India, and I brought in a very beautiful, I thought, essay on an Indian servant that we'd had who used to talk to the crows while he worked, while he cleaned. And I knew enough Hindustani so I could pick up his voice and what he was saying and got some of it. And I thought I would write a nice story about that. And when I was done, I was just almost tears in my eyes. I thought it was so beautiful. And so I turned it into Alan Tate and expected, you know, great smiles of appreciation. But his answer was, what do you want to write about all this exotic stuff for? He said, write about what you know. He said, if you write about what you know, and know personally, and know deeply, and know better than anyone else, he says, that's going to be plenty exotic to everybody else. And anyone who has read Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance knows how completely that fulfills that definition. It is about what I know, but it certainly is plenty exotic to everybody else. Well, now to get back to the thread of what I was saying, I'd had the idea, I'd had the beginning story, and so I started to do this essay, which was just going to be a simple little kind of clever tongue-in-cheek thing on Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. I expected it to take about, 2 or 3 weeks at first. And as I got into it, it became apparent to me that there are some very deep problems here. First, that you can't really get from Zen to motorcycle maintenance very fast. Before you get there, you find that there are underlying problems which are very deep and seem to get deeper and deeper and deeper. And so gradually, out of the situation which I was in, I was not deliberately pasting this onto what I was doing. It was growing out of what I was doing. I began to discover that I was onto more than I had thought I had been onto, and that this essay was turning into something quite a bit bigger. So now I sat down and had to devise a way of keeping track of what were now very rapidly proliferating thoughts. Now this, I don't know, transfers so much to visual media, but it's quite important in the writing media, particularly in a large thing like a book, to keep track of where you've been and try to figure out where you're going, and to do this in a kind of a summary form. Now normally for a small article or a small essay you'd use an outline. But you find that when you start getting into something big, and I didn't know this, I just discovered this, that outline gets crossed out so fast it becomes unusable very quickly. And usually you're too lazy to go back and re-outline further and rewrite the same outline all over again in your different form every time you make a change. So what I did for this particular outline was something I learned to do in technical writing, and that was put down each idea on individual slips of paper and then compare them and see which went first. And so my outline was always in a series of slips that went on one after another. And this is just a technique, a gimmick you might say, but it turned out, I think, to be a technique which gives the Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance a great deal of its fundamental complexity and its fundamental sweep and its fundamental wholeness and its unification. The reviews I've read all seem to regard this as some great act of creativity. It was a very systematic, deliberate act. I was about as creative as an accountant at this point. I was just putting down these slips and comparing them. But this particular form gave me the advantage of being able to expand in the middle, of being able to reorganize at any time. So I had a flexible outline that could grow as my understanding of the story grew. And I was never limited. I was free to throw away where I had been and restart again, over and over again with what was coming in new. And I'm sure that in any creative project, you really can't perceive what the end is going to be unless it's a very small thing you're doing. And I think the advantage of this particular device was that it always kept me open, it always kept me flexible, it always gave me a kind of a hollowness so that I could constantly be refilled with new things that were coming in. And the result of this was a book of many levels and of much complexity, but whose levels and whose complexity somehow always seem to, at the last minute, hang together. I'll go into those levels now in the way in which they appeared. I've said I first had the essay. The essay began to expand into a very deep and difficult process, it became seen to me as a conflict of human values and technology. That was where it was going. Zen traditionally is sometimes seen as apart from technology, if not absolutely opposed to it. But for this thing, I had to show the relationships between the two, and so I began to see that what I was going to have to do was relate human values to technological values, and to try to provide some uniform base by which one could get from one to the other. This got me then deeper and deeper and deeper into philosophy, and into an area of philosophy where I'd been before, and which somehow had subconsciously perhaps started me thinking in the direction of this whole thing in the first place. That is, I had not known that I was going to arrive at this kind of deep essay, but somehow I have a feeling that there was a well of subconscious thought that was driving me toward this thing, and the whole experience that had brought me into the hospital was now showing itself to be relevant to what I was now writing. And so by leaving myself open, by drawing upon subconscious forces, was gradually seeing that my whole life was starting to come out through this little through this little tiny essay that I had originally started. Again, I'll repeat, not a deliberate thing where I'm coming at it from a distance saying, now I'm going to do this thing which is in front of me, but a kind of an opening up from inside and finding that this thing which I've started to do is bigger than I ever thought it was, and I'm going to let it grow. I'm not going to cut it off. And at that point, the thing became very serious. Now, of course, nobody understood what the hell I was doing about this time. And this was starting to create real problems because I was beginning to get just a little bit obsessed. I began to feel importance. This was starting to be a way out of past problems for me. Is it going to become a way of relating to people, which I'd never related before? And so now I became very, very difficult to deal with other people. As my wife and kids would tell you, I was very uncommunicative. I would just go in my room and sit and think. I wouldn't talk to anybody. At work, I would just get what minimum I could done on the job, or get what maximum I could done on the job, rather, and then devote the rest of the time to these obsessive thoughts, which are growing and growing and snowballing all the time. And pretty soon it became apparent that I had to have time to write, that I couldn't just do it on weekends or at home at night. And so I just said, well, I've got to get up in the morning and do this before I go to work. So I talked to my employer, Stu Cohen, over at Century Publications, and he was kind enough to allow me to use an office that he had there. He gave me a special desk and said, put all your stuff in there and don't tell me what you're doing. I don't want to hear about it. And that was an act of very great kindness, and one that's not easily forgotten. So I started to get up at 2 o'clock in the morning and go down to a little place above Robert's Shoe Store on Chicago and Lake Street and write from 2 o'clock in the morning, mostly filling notes at first, and sometimes doing sketches and discovering my way as I went along. But writing and then coming home for breakfast and then getting onto the job all day long, and then coming home at night, having supper, and going to bed at 6 o'clock. This created some terrific problems. Of course, the kids were justly impatient with the idea that they should be quiet at night, and it was a hardship on the whole family, and great arguments proceeded, and I finally just checked out of the house and found a $10 a week room down on 10th Avenue in Chicago, or somewhere down at a very low price section of town. In other words, willing to say, even to my own family, look, I'm going to do this thing, and if you block me, watch out. This is going to happen. See, this is not something that I'm really in control of. And it's going to emerge now, and just do the best you can to understand. And after a short time, while I hardly had any contact at all with my family, my wife began to understand that this was a very serious thing, and made allowances, and the kids made allowances. And so, again, it kept growing and growing and growing. However, some of the effects were very hard. One of the effects was, of course, on Chris, who you may remember from the book, those of you who read it. And he was feeling very bad and very separate from all of us. And so I thought, well, this summer when I have a vacation, when I'm done with the work at Control Data, I'll take him on a motorcycle vacation. And I'll have a chance to think about some of these ideas. And so I did this, and with John and Sylvia Sutherland and Chris, we went out to Montana and then down to, or over to Oregon and down to San Francisco. And from there down to Los Angeles and then back. At that time, all the time, the problem that was bothering me most, the one that was coming up, was that although I'm speaking, I think, out of my heart, when it comes out on paper, it looks like somebody's talking from a pulpit, like somebody's speaking ex cathedra, like I'm pontificating, and I didn't know how to beat this. It seems to me like all essays get this way. Whenever you write your private personal thoughts and put them in essay form and somebody else reads them, the vision that that person gets is that you are sort of high and mighty and talking down, and I really wanted to avoid that, but didn't know how to avoid that problem, and didn't know what the answer was until I got to Los Angeles, and there in the middle of Hollywood, that is appropriate, there in the middle of Hollywood, thought, well, why not put the whole blessed essay in the mouth of a narrator who was on a motorcycle trip? And then we get another whole dimension to the entire story. And now we no longer have a person talking from a pulpit. We have a person out in front, out in the open, in real life, a person who has errors, who has failings, who has weaknesses, who doesn't know where he's been, who doesn't know where he's going, but who nevertheless has to try to make sense out of this as he goes. This is the human situation, and I wanted this essay to be delivered by somebody who was in the human situation. And so that became the basic format of Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, and that at that point you can see the book as it now stands. However, although I continued this process for 2 years of getting up at 2 in the morning and working until 4, and it completed the entire work of 125,000 words, when I got done, I was dissatisfied with it, and I set it aside for about 2 weeks. And then I came back and looked at it, and I was just shocked at how completely bad it was. It was just a rotten book. Some people are feeling some familiarity with that too. This is common to all the arts. I think, and this may transfer over into other areas, that what I had been doing the first time was just staring into that great crystal ball and coming up with a manuscript. But now the second time I was staring at the manuscript and looking at it no longer as a creator but as a reader. And the reader, of course, has an entirely different picture of that than the creator does when he's just staring at space. And there's a big period of depression that I went through, and I think is quite normal in the arts, although I wasn't really prepared for it at the time. So I went through a lot, as I say, a great period of depression, a period of really hopelessness, although there had been periods of hopelessness all along. During this 2-year period, sometimes I would get up in the morning and just nothing would be there. It was the same situation in Mexico, except that now I was riding it through, you know. I just say, well, okay, here I sit doing nothing, you know. All right, that's how it's going to go. And then after about 3 or 4 hours of that, somehow my hand would pick itself up and start to write. And that was some of the best writing. That writing which is done out of complete despair, out of complete feeling of hopelessness about what you're doing. But then after the first draft was done and I'd gone through that long depressed period, I wrote a chapter. And now I knew, because of all the experiences the first time around, what the second chapter was going to be like, or the second draft was going to be like. I had the outline in my head. I was no longer writing in a crystal ball. I was writing against something that I knew and had already been worded once badly. And then I sat down, and without any great feelings of elation or without any great feelings of depression, hit it, you know, just sailed. Everything just worked on that first chapter for me. The chapter that's now the first chapter in the book is almost unchanged. I wrote that without maybe changing 5 or 6 words in the whole thing. It just went from beginning to end, just completely right, after two years of failure to get it right. And I sent it around to the publishers, and it was the night after I sent it out, a call comes from over the telephone. I'll offer you $500 for it, you know, right now, for the option to buy when you finish the book. This is it, you know. That convinced me at that time that I better stop work at UNIVAC and get busy on this manuscript. And so that's what I did. I took a leave of absence from Century Publication, and for the next 2 years worked on this manuscript with great feelings of confidence that something was happening. There were a lot of family problems at this time. They continued, they didn't end. But somehow I had a feeling I was winning all the way, that these were obstacles I could overcome, that it was really, in a sense, won. As I think I said it at the end of the first chapter when I wrote, it's all downhill from here on. Of course, it was a 2-year hill, but it was downhill. Once that central feeling that I'm doing it was there. So chapters were written one by one. My wife, who had been so hostile at first, was now completely overwhelmed, or not overwhelmed, but thrilled, because she could see these chapters were coming up too, and she is herself a writer, and a very good one. And she used to get very frustrated because she'd finish a chapter, and of course I'd written this book with quite a bit of suspense in it, and she'd finish chapter 2, you know, and suddenly realize there is no chapter 3. You know, chapter 3 is just walking around the house here doing nothing. so she'd say, get busy, you know, get on chapter 3. And it was an entirely different feeling, and we began to see that things were really going to start to happen now and get done. Well, chapter after chapter came along. But one by one, the publishers have been dropping off, mainly through attrition. Publishing is a high turnover field. It's like advertising. If you're good, you go up fast, but if you're bad, you go down fast. And companies are very quick to exchange people that haven't been producing for them lately. So out of the 121 publishers I had first talked to, I was reduced to about 22 who liked it, who liked the first idea, and now down to about 6 by the time my second draft was done. And out of this 6, to these 6, I sent a complete manuscript of about 160,000 words, and out of this 6, only one finally decided that he wanted it. I still have his letter. It's I think a very fine letter. There's a nice story about this person too. I've heard that articles have been written about him as a kind of a whiz kid of the publishing field. That his name is James Landis. He's kind of a wild man. I had thought of him as sort of balding and maybe in his 50s or 60s, and had never seen him in this entire 4-year period. But about 2 weeks ago, my wife, Nancy, asked me to come downstairs. Said, there's somebody here who wants to see you. And now in this wave of publicity that the book is getting, I'm getting, you know, strange people from time to time coming and wanting to see me and, you know, ask me where they should buy a motorcycle and things like this. So I figured this is another one of these things. And sure enough, it was some guy with curly hair and a beard and a neckerchief and mod clothes and just kind of a wild look in his eye, and he's about 28 years old. And this is my editor, James Landis, that I've been writing to all these years. And I was going to shake his hand. I just reached up and hugged him with all my might. It was just this one person had saved that whole book all that time and gone through with it. Well, of course, now everything has just gone bananas in New York over this thing. It's on the bestseller list now. It reached number 10 in Times list in San Francisco. It's number 5 bestseller. In the B. Dalton list here in Minneapolis is number 14 bestseller. As I mentioned earlier, the Today Show looks like they're going to put me on. I've had interviews with the New York Times. Next Sunday's Times Literary, not Times Literary Supplement, but the Sunday book review section, that's it, is, according to the publicity vice president at Morrow, going to come up with a book review that is the most unbelievable I've ever seen. I'm waiting to see what it is. I think it will probably be quite wild. All the reviews have been raves except one. Well, two, actually. The first one was a little one in Publishers Weekly, and the second one in the Philadelphia Bulletin. But outside of that, every one has been overwhelmingly favorable, and my life has just changed completely. That's why I'm here. 6 weeks ago, maybe, or 6 months ago, people wonder, well, you know, who's he? But now, all of a sudden, I'm really in a process of readjusting myself I hope very rapidly to the whole new life situation that I'm in. I asked for it. I can't complain. And maybe I can do something this way that I couldn't do before. I find that I used to have a lot of wild ideas, and everybody knew it, and kind of said, well, there goes that guy with wild ideas. But now, because of the book, I find sometimes people listen. The ideas aren't any less wild or more wild than they were before, but I seem to be able to accomplish things that I couldn't accomplish before. So I think that's about what I want to say about the creative process as I have seen it and have gone through it in terms of these two books. The first one in which I saw the book as something separate from myself, something I was going to do, something I was going to be a writer. You see, I was role-playing the thing. And the second time, I wasn't being a writer. I was just responding to a real need. And I was going to write that book whether I was a writer or not, you see. And I felt that this was a very important thing to learn. And if I were going to, say, pass something on to anybody, I'd say that's it. Let it come out of you. Don't be apart from it. In the book, we talk a lot about avoiding a subject-object relationship between the doer and the done. And in this second book, this is what happened. The book wasn't objective. Sometimes I could watch my hand move. It was almost like automatic writing or spirit writing coming along on the page. But I think that kind of way of doing things is the right way and the way that produces things that are of real value, where there's no separateness between the doer and the done. And when that happens, you know it. You just feel it. It's just, wow, it's a whole other thing. But it takes a long frustration to reach it. Well, that's all I have to say, and I'd like to ask for questions at this time. I've been hired from 1 until 4 o'clock. And that gives you 2 whole hours to really ask me anything you want. Maybe I should give a few minutes of silence. That's a good Zen thing. Just give a few minutes of silence to think of what you'd like to ask. Yes.
Talk about the idea of quality. The question I have about that, I can't really feel that I can explain.
Mm-hmm.
But in reading the whole section, I haven't finished the book. But in reading the whole section about quality,
Mm-hmm.
it relates to your metaphysics.
Mm-hmm.
I understand it as an argument, and it's a very persuasive argument,
Mm-hmm.
but I also understand that you're, it's more than an argument, it's an attempt at a proof, a source that almost that quality is God or quality is
Yeah.
the
Central thing, yeah, from which all else derives, yeah.
almost that to avoid quality or to go against quality is to go against all the forces of the universe and you will fail. I understand that as an argument, and I believe it.
Mm-hmm.
Could you try to get into the proof and explain why it's true?
Oh,
That's
yeah.
what the whole book is about.
Yeah, it really is. That's central to the whole idea. By quality, I mean the term I think I mean, and I hope I mean, the equivalent of the term dharma, which is a Buddhist term, and which is mentioned at the end. And I would like to fall back upon the old philosophic statements of the Hindus and the Buddhists, who are very close on the subject of the Dharma, only substituting the term quality, and I hope to do that some future time. The ultimate quality, the quality which Phaedrus saw in the end, is a quality which cannot be apprehended by rational means. No proofs are possible. No proofs can be given. The ultimate proof, the one which is given in the 4,000-year-old Upanishads, is he who knows this has no further doubt. It's there, and to subject it to rational proofs is to place the proofs in a higher position than quality itself. And it's argued that this is what was done by the Socratics, you see. They said to Gorgias, now you talk about the good. Please tell me about the good. Put it in rational language so that I can subject it to logical proofs. And in so doing, they elevated the dialectic, the proofs, and they subordinated quality, or they subordinated the good, which is an equivalent term, or the dharma, and all of a sudden we have a world in which reason dominates what's good rather than what's good dominates reason. And that, I think, is where I'm getting at. So although what I'm talking about, in the last, and in perhaps the most important sentence in the entire discourse on quality, Phaedrus is really done for. He's completely annihilated. And at that point, when his self is gone, when all his rational arguments are demolished, when there's nothing left, no personality, anything, then at that moment the quality, which all this time he had never understood, is finally made apparent, you see, beyond rationality. And so in the Hindu tradition, there are many ways of approaching this ultimate thing. As soon as you give it a name or call it a thing, you're no longer at the ultimate level, but that ultimate which is beyond the word ultimate. One of them is the technique of meditation, which is what we practice here in Zen, where Zen is, of course, a continuation of the old dhyana yoga, in which one just sits silently and allows one's thoughts to go away by their own dead weight. Others are bhakti yoga, which is the hatha yoga, which is the physical exercise, I believe, bhakti yoga, which is devotional, jnana yoga, I believe, is intellectual, and all these are different ways of approaching this ultimate, which has been called quality in the book. But in each case, these are fingers pointing at the moon rather than the moon itself. And the moon itself is only apparent at the period, or after the fingers have been abandoned, you see. And I say I can talk a lot about the wording of and the language of quality, but ultimately the quality, which is the pure thing, or the pure non-thing, as the Buddhists would say, is apprehended in ways that are not to be described. In one of the articles coming up about me, it says Pirsig never answers questions; he only responds to them. And I think maybe that's what I've done here. But can you tell me if there's anything more I can say on the subject?
No, I just. No, that's fine.
Oh, okay. You almost got a microphone, yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I believe it too.
Oh, good, yeah.
You always get hung up on this problem.
Mm-hmm.
You believe it, why do you believe it? Or
Mm-hmm.
it's true, but how do you know it's true?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so you search for some kind of a proof.
Mm-hmm.
And,
Yeah, right. Well, this is the way we've been. This is the way we've been brainwashed, I think, to believe that nothing's true until we proved it's true. And I think because of this, artists, particularly in the visual arts, have been always subordinate to intellectuals, for, in the structure of society, because, they say, well, they don't, what are they doing? And of course, it's very hard to come up with an answer, unless you say we're producing quality. And they say, well, what's that? And they want you to define it, see? And so this is kind of a way of saying, no, I refuse to define it, but boy, you better know it's there. And in my own belief, Plato created a world, a perfect society in which artists were at the bottom rung just about. Artists and rhetoricians, they were the worst people of all. And they had at one time a much higher status in Greece. And I would like to say, and it's my belief, that the people who are most concerned with quality, who are directly concerned with quality to the exclusion almost of everything else, are the people in the arts, and that they should have the highest place in society, not the lowest, which is why I'm here. I haven't talked to the university yet. Maybe you won't. This, incidentally, might explain why, well, I'm just speculating now, but it might explain certain undercurrents of difference between the University of Minnesota art groups and the Minneapolis College of Art and Design. Because over there, art is tied to the intellectual thing. And the head of the art department can go to the vice president of the university, and has. And the vice president of the university can tell him, I hear all your students like art a lot. Meaning that's pretty bad, This is the academic approach. If the students like it, it must be wrong, And so when art is subordinate to that kind of an intellectual domination, they have real problems over there, just an agonizing thing. And I feel that part of the reason why this school I don't know for sure, but I have a feeling that one of the reasons, if not why the school exists, but why it's become so strong, is it isn't subordinate to the intellectual function. It's a free enterprise, which is subordinate only to the goals of art, which are quality, and a marketplace, and a few other things. But anyway, with a much greater emphasis upon quality. Gee, that was a good question. That kept me going for at least 6 minutes. Are there any others that I can answer? Yes?
I haven't read the book, but
Mm-hmm.
you've talked about it. It's as if it's, well, I'm wondering if you feel it's sort of a final statement, or if your life has been completely changed so that it's just an initial plunge into paths that will lead you to a lot of other places.
Yeah. Oh, you got a microphone coming. I guess I can rephrase the question. Do I feel that this is a static statement of how things are? Am I interpreting that correctly, or?
Well, yeah. How much it's a synthesis of what's gone in the past.
Yeah.
That you will leave behind.
And move on. Yeah, I sure hope so. I'm done for if it isn't. One of the advantages of keeping quality undefined, which is central to the book, that we never define it. This drives people nuts sometimes. I talk to them for hours and hours and hours about quality, and I never say what it is, and they always expect me to say what it is. As long as you keep it undefined, then it becomes an instrument of change, and you can grow, because the things that you find quality in are going to change as you grow. And in the past 4 years, this book has seemed to me to have quality. But I can tell you right now, I'm getting a little tired of it. It's just past for me, and now I'm looking on to something else. I hope that answers what you wanted. Yeah. See, that's what I want really with the intellectual structure that's been posed here is a framework in which one is free to grow and change and not get stuck with a set of ideas that he had yesterday. I think that's really, really vital. And when you take the central term of your whole intellectual structure and you make that wide open and changing from minute to minute and different from person to person, then you've got a dynamic philosophy rather than one which is forever confining you and forcing you into rebellion of one sort or another. Yes?
It seems to me that after reading the book, you're constantly just the paradox that you're using your intellect to describe an non-intellectual experience.
Yes, definitely. Yeah.
I'm just wondering if you seem
Mm-hmm.
to have a very incisive intellect, obviously, and yet it's in Buddhism.
Mm.
I think talk about that for a moment.
Yeah.
Do you find an inner conflict in this, or do you find that you've been able to resolve the use of your intellect to perceive abstract terms and yet being in touch with quality as a reality?
Yeah. Well, the important thing is not to be contained by intellect, but to simply use it as an instrument. When we were all sitting over at Beverly White's house in St. Paul as Zen Buddhists, we used to, from time to time, put up a koan, and then we'd sit for half an hour, or some statement that was very difficult. They weren't really koans. Then after about half an hour, we'd all give our comment on what it meant. And one of the koans that came up was, of what use are words? Then we all sat for half an hour. And of course, when the time came to answer, almost nobody answered, which is a nice Zen answer, except me, in which, being a writer, I felt, and an intellectual, felt a little bit on the spot. So I said, well, words like hands and feet are not necessary, but they're plenty useful. And I think that in an understanding of quality, which is that the ultimate understanding of quality is wordless, but that the quality inheres in the words you use. And throughout the book, I felt a very strong mandate to be very sure that I was saying these things in a high-quality way and not getting into the philosopher's trap of talking about beauty in the most ugly language possible. I think that our traditional Western way is to try to capture life in a net of words. But I think one can realize that the net of words is a part of life, see? And that the danger is not in using the words, the danger is in clinging to them, and in clinging to their meaning, and saying, oh, now I have spoken a great truth. There's a wonderful line by Suzuki Roshi, who died recently, in his book Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind, which I feel is one of the best ever written, which he says, when I'm all done with this lecture, you should forget every word I've said. And you think, well, now, what are we sitting here for if this is the case? But that's one of the most profound statements he could have made. He was using words, but he didn't want you to cling to them. He simply wanted you to absorb them and make them a part of you and carry on the Dharma. But the words could be a useful instrument for this purpose. So the philosophy, the analysis, the bright monkey shines that are going on in the philosophic realm in this book are instruments. And again, the vital line in the end is that in the end, Phaedrus never understood what quality was. All the time he had derived these huge, vast intellectual matrices for it. Well, another good question. Are there any others now? Yes?
I was wondering, for your own personal life,
Mm-hmm.
dealing with these problems of trying to resolve suppositions, speculations,
Mm-hmm.
and that once you overcome the intellectual traps and all these things, that you move into sort of a emotional or a being situation where you say it becomes apparent, the truth. And I was wondering for you personally, if this position of knowing is more than just for yourself, apparent, or appearance, and more in terms of it seems to be promised by getting through this barrier is a real knowing. I mean, there's no question to yourself that you know it's not real appearance.
I'm having a little trouble hearing. I'm sorry.
Well, you spoke about apparent. After this man discovers that there was no way he could just discover
Mm-hmm.
or understand
Mm-hmm.
with all his intellectuality,
Right.
that going through this process and giving it up
Mm-hmm.
becomes apparent.
Yes.
I was wondering if you're using the word apparent for sort of social quality that's for me only, not for you. But what you have gone through and put together through these processes, now for you it goes beyond transcends appearance and feeling of real knowing.
Oh, I see. Well, I guess I mean knowing and apparent is the same word. Does that? Maybe I'm missing your meaning. In that last line, when he says that the truth became apparent to him, I simply we're getting into the level where individual words start to lose meaning. When you're at that level, you can say true, or you can say apparent, or you can say a lot of things, but the things start to get a little loose, or a little. By apparent, as I meant it at that point, I meant that the person Phaedrus and the situation he was in were no longer separate, apparent in the revealed sense. There's apparent in the scientific sense, and that isn't what was meant at all. But at that kind of apparent stuff is as I say, in that realm of language where nothing is very precise, where you can only hint and talk and hope people kind of intuitively see that there is a level of apparentness which is beyond the rational level. Well, artists know that anyway, I think, but there is a level of apparentness which is can be known only through direct experience. I'm not saying anything very original at all. About 6,000 years old. Is there any other question?
Was there an analogy between writing the book, the process of writing the book,
Hmm.
and the process of making motorcycle?
Yes. Oh, yeah. And the analogy was quality, of course. The book was very parallel to the motorcycle. A book. People sometimes talk, romantics, I think, sometimes talk about inspiration and a great need for a feeling a divine withitness, and I've sort of talked in that direction myself, but in the process of creating the book, I don't think I let go of the whole hard, cold analytic techniques. That is, I still had my little stack of slips. I wasn't forgetting all about that and wandering off. I think that in the book, as in the motorcycle, you do need a fusion of the rational way of going at things and the aesthetic way of going at things. And if that book had been without a strong rational structure, it would have been perhaps a very, it's hard to say how it would have been, but I can guess that it might have been a very moving and emotional thing, but one which did not really stick to your ribs. If it had been completely rational without the aesthetic aspects, I think it might have been a book which would stick to your ribs, but nobody would have read, because it was so dull and so dreary and so analytic and so without pizzazz, so to speak. So I really think in everything you do, a fusion of these two is quite necessary, that you do need to learn that is, I think when you're doing a work of art, you should absolutely use everything you can come up with. You know, throw in it all, including the kitchen sink. Just give it everything. And if you can use your head too, well, for heaven's sake, use it. You know, don't abandon anything. You need all you got. You know, and so. Sometimes people say, "Well, that's too intellectual. I don't want to get involved in that because that's not really art." Well, hell, I think intellectuality is an art form too, and a badly mauled one, and one that tries to take over other art forms and call them its own. But it's an art form, and people who are in philosophy know this. You know, when they get into a philosophic conference, I think the point of view is won not by the most rational person, but by the most eloquent. That's a personal point of view, I guess. Are there any other questions? Yes?
There's a point in the book where you talk about screw on a motorcycle.
Oh, stuckness, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And for throughout the book, and also apparently your own experience there,
Mm-hmm.
the points where you're stuck
Mm-hmm.
lead to some kind of a revelation or an understanding of it.
Mm-hmm.
Is there some general